Good morning again. We're going to go ahead and get rolling here. I just want to do a quick introduction for our speakers. We're doing a new version this round, so we're doing a panel discussion with 3 speakers. So our speakers this morning are Rania Al-Hamoud from the University of Waterloo, Daniel Castaneda from James Madison University, and Jennifer Eisenhower Tanner from University of Wyoming. And their topic is multicultural communication.
Thank you. Oh, okay, so the mic is working. So thanks for coming so early to this development breakfast thing. We're very excited to have you here. We're going to try to talk about diversity and multi-communication. This is a brief slide of who we are. I'm going to try to focus more about making sure you know what diversity I'm talking about, and then maybe talking about tools we could use. And to do that, because it's early in the morning and I want to make sure you're slightly engaged, I'm going to start by asking a question by the raise of hand. Who, thinking about a learner or a session, who's comfortable normally asking questions in a session or classroom? Just wanted to engage from the audience. I have one hand who felt shy a little bit after nobody raised. Okay, so we have some who are comfortable, so that's good. And then I'm going to ask my next question. Who normally is comfortable answering questions in a classroom or a session? Maybe the hands dropped slightly here. So I'm going to just turn this. So that's just to see that there is not everybody. One thing is I made an assumption that the people who didn't raise their hand are either uncomfortable to ask a question or uncomfortable to answer a question. I'm not sure if this assumption is right. Maybe they just didn't hear my question, or maybe, I don't know what the case is, but that's an assumption I'm going to make as a person standing in the front, and I need to make clear that this is an assumption. However, just to make sure I help everybody here in the room feel comfortable asking questions or answering questions, what we have done is we created a Piazza online forum if you want to use it. If you're not comfortable asking questions and you want to ask your questions anonymously without anybody knowing who is asking that question, you could do it live right now, and we will be helping asking those questions. Nobody would know who asked that question. Piazza is an online forum. You could log in to piazza.com_American, well, why did I say underscore? /American_concrete _institute. Notice I typed institute wrong, so you have to follow my spelling, because now that's how it's created. And if you don't add an I before the U, you're not going to be able to log in. Spring 2019, since this is sponsored by the S802 committee, S802 is at the end, and you need the access code S802. So I will write this access code at here. So if you wanted to log into the course, you can't do it on your phone, remember. It's just a quick thing. You could log on Safari, you could log on app, whatever you want. So this is just available for you in case people are not comfortable and do have questions as we go through. This is also available. You could make it available in any session. I'm just doing this as an example, as a tool you can use in any session, in a classroom, wherever you are. What it does is you're going to see that on the top, I also created folders by our different names in case you're directing the question to one or the other out of us. But again, you don't have to use it if you are uncomfortable. Okay, now I want to ask another question. Going back, thinking when you were learners, who liked writing exams in general? Okay. None? Okay. And we graduated in engineering. Who liked multiple choice question exams? We had, okay. I didn't expect that. I expected the other way around. See, I made assumptions too, but it's okay. So we have about 7 people who raised their hands. Who liked open book exams? Oh, okay. Okay. So you can see the diversity between us right now just by raise of hands. So everybody has different interests, have different ways they can learn. Again, we make assumptions when we when we do those, when we think that people didn't raise their hands, because there are several reasons why they might not. Yeah, there's a way to turn this around. So there is a lot of assumptions we make, and just maybe to keep it a little bit interactive, what do you see here when you look at this picture? This is a picture that was taken yesterday when we were out for dessert. An apple. Okay, let's check if it is an apple. So does anybody else see an apple? Yeah. So we made the same assumption. We thought it was an apple, and then what happened, we opened it. It was an apple illusion. So it was not really an apple. It was a kind of dessert that was coated with sugar. So what I meant, just to show you that how come sometimes we make assumptions. Not only that, we make assumptions, plus we have different tastes. So one of our group who was with us thought it was, or two actually, thought it was too sour, and the others thought, no, just sweet. So even with taste, there is a difference. So just I'm clarifying here the differences. So again, I wanted to say that we do make assumptions. I came from a country where it never rained in the summer. You could plan picnics, you could plan weddings, you could plan whatever you want, parties, outside. You don't even need to reserve a venue. Just like you could go outside and do whatever you want. Came to Canada, it rained in the summer. I was so disappointed. But, however, for me, rain was associated with cold. In Canada, it rains, but you don't have to wear a jacket. It's still warm. It rains while it's warm. So this is something that, what? It rains in the summer? I can't plan an activity? So this is something that, based on my background, was strange and new to me. So that is something that just wanted to speak to, that everybody has a different background, and when they come to it, they see that it changes. Not to mention that I also didn't have electricity, didn't have water, but those are normal things. So just let me go back quickly here. Oh, one more thing. I thought, oh, I have good language. I'm coming here. My language is not a barrier for me. I've studied in an American university, so I think it's not a barrier, it's fine. And then I go on the highway trying to listen to the traffic news. What? Is there traffic or not? I mean, the speed they speak on is really eliminates even people who speak very English, or they think they speak English very well, not to understand what's being talked about. So sometimes even the speed of how we talk, it makes a difference, especially when somebody is new to this or is not used to that. Not only speed, I mean, even if I go to I went for a bit to Minnesota, the accent is slightly different that I needed to get used to. So maybe keeping that in mind when we are presenting, that not everybody has that same background, have different accents. I didn't think I had an accent, and then my students used to always comment, oh, she has an accent, she has an accent. Oh, I have an accent? So just keep in mind that people don't hear it in themselves. You don't hear yourself when you have an accent, you don't know, but people who are attending can see it or can hear it. So trying to, as much as possible, to speak slowly would help. And my daughter, when she speaks, I cannot understand. What did you say? She just runs with those sentences quickly. Okay, now what do I have here? Oh, this is a good question. When I mention the word play, what comes to your mind? Especially people who said they don't have a problem answering questions. Children. Anybody else? Anything? Sports? In the theater? Music? Sorry? Sudoku? See? When I say one word, it's meaning something different to everybody. So I might, because it depends on what you have as a background in your history. So I had this sentence. I was working I was a PhD student. I was working in the lab. I was working as a teaching assistant for a professional development course. And we had a meeting. And I called, and I told the assistant, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it to the meeting because my casting has been delayed. What would you assume? Concrete casting. Oh, I am within concrete people, so you assume concrete casting. What did that person tell what did the person tell? The person said, and I'm going to just try to remember because, he told his supervisor, the assistant told, her tryout got delayed. He told her tryout for what? She said tryout for the play. What play? So for them, casting means casting for a play. And he said, she doesn't work in theater, so how come she's trying out for a play? And then he asked me. And so just to keep in mind that when I say a word, it doesn't mean I'm assuming that everybody is going to think the same thing, and it's not. And that's why I wanted to try to have something common. Just keep that in mind. So there is going to be different background knowledge is going to affect everybody differently. Different cultural background is going to also change. Different life experiences is going to make everything you say different for everybody. And actually that enriches our communication. It's not hinders our communication. We just need to be careful of how we communicate it. And then it's going to be really enrich our audience, whoever that audience is. Again, keeping in mind, so we talked about differences in background, differences in life experiences. There are other differences, which is differences in learning style. And that's why you need to try to find different engagement techniques, different either within the audience or even in a classroom. If it's a workshop, if it's a seminar, whatever it is, try to do different engagement techniques. Visuals is good, trying to have visuals. Although now I'm noticing this is very small font. Using boards or flipped charts. Stories. I found out that telling stories that either link to the audience, like asking questions, or telling stories that link to the audience, or telling personal stories is going to make people more engaged. I went to this session, and it was about chemicals and how to disperse of chemicals and so on, and it was so boring for me. Like I was going, and I'm not going to enjoy this lecture. And then the person presenting said, I had my in-laws coming to live in the basement, and I just painted my basement, and the order is not going to go. It needs 2 days to go. What am I going to do? How do I solve this problem? And I right away got engaged. So relating to personal stories, even if it's not you, even if it doesn't link to you, but it makes you think, oh, maybe I'll have something similar, a similar situation. Maybe my parents will come visit. My kids will come visit if the kids are older and went away. So it really, adding stories to any explanation makes your audience more and more engaged. So it's really amazing how to think about it. Also, there are lots of things you could do. There is the Think, Pair, Share. There is the clickers. There is Kahoot, which is games. So those are, especially if you're looking into the classroom, everybody now, you can need to use that. Everybody has a phone device, or maybe not a phone. I don't have a phone. I have an iPod. But still, it's something an electronic that I can use. Let's make use of them, especially if people are on them anyways. Let's try to make use of them. Now, I used Piazza. That's what I know. But maybe somebody else can use something else. Kahoot is a fun games that we do. Yes? What's a clicker? See, that's a great thing. I made an assumption that people know what clickers are. But people don't. Some people don't. So a clicker is something like this, something that you click. And I can use in the classroom, so I have 160, or sometimes in an audience, you could use it like with this Piazza. It's to poll. So you put several answers, like A, B, C, D, and you poll how many people think A is the right answer, how many people think B is the right answer, C or D, without having to raise their hand, without having to discuss, without me having to know who answered what, if I don't want to. And then it shows me that chart, that bar chart that tells me how many people thought the answer was A, the answer was B, the answer was C or D. And it's great because it triggers discussion in a room, especially if there is diversity. So you really need to, well, there is diversity, but especially if you ask the right questions, because some questions, the answers are really clear. If you ask questions that the answers are really clear, will not trigger discussion. So you really have to be careful in asking the right question there. But thanks for asking me this question, because I made an assumption here. Yes?
These clickers, like everybody here would have a clicker?
Yes, these clickers, like everybody here will have a clicker. So normally, you could have it on your phone as an app as well. So normally, students are in a classroom, So I remember we had a clicker session once with the S802, and they actually brought clickers to the room, and people were using them. I did attend that session, and it was a lovely session. So yes, you could have clickers. If it's a small group, you could have your own 20 clickers, distribute them, and let people use them. If it's, but this was not the aim of this session, so we didn't bring clickers. But if you don't, some people download them on a phone. Yes, they come with a cost, though. Yes, but that's a good question. And again, Kahoot is an online thing, a game. I used to use this in my classroom. One of the things that I've used, and maybe not everybody noticed, did anybody notice there was music playing in the background? Yeah, and I always use that before my classroom starts, or I think it helps. At least I had one of my cultural background in there, and I actually ask my students, survey my students what is their favorite songs, and I have them all played. So, and we have diverse songs because I teach in a university in Canada, so I have a diverse amount of cultures in my classroom, which is amazing. It helps students open. It helped me relieve the stress. Oh, imagine how stressed I was before I came here. But it does help. So I hope it did make an impact on you as well. I think that's it for my turn, and next is Daniel. And you can ask me questions later if you want. Yes.
Hi, morning everyone. My name is Dan Castaneda. I'm coming to you from James Madison University. It's a non-discipline specific engineering program. Many of you would call that an engineering program or general engineering program. I previously had been at a civil engineering department for a few years, so I actually have experiences at two types of institutions. One where student motivations are drastically focused, perhaps within civil engineering sub-disciplines, and one in which students have no clue what they want to do in engineering, but they want to explore all aspects of it. What I want to talk to you today about, and I need to grab this clicker so I have it in my hand, is a pedagogical approach that instructors can take that would inform their teaching and instruction of a course design and perhaps a curriculum design. And that pedagogical approach is called culturally relevant pedagogy, which sounds sort of scary because it sounds like we're going to talk about culture and how culture somehow is going to take over engineering, and engineering is the application of math and science, nothing else. But let's explore what this pedagogical approach is and why there may be some value to it. I know we're in Canada now. I'm surprised too. I had to get a passport to come here. And in the United States, which is where I'm from and where I think many of us traveled from, or at least are teaching now and conducting research, there is a persistent underrepresentation of women and minorities in science and engineering fields. And the NSF conducted a few studies, the most recent one being in 2017, where there's simply a demographic understanding of what that makeup is, both in the general population and in science and engineering subdisciplines. And largely, by and large, science and engineering is overly dominated by men, and it's overly dominated by Caucasians. Is this a problem? There's a few different ways that we can view this. One of the ways that we can view this is that engineering then can become a little bit blindsided or a bit unsure of the diverse society in which the engineer practitioners serve. So then we fail to properly articulate or communicate with a community that may be highly diverse, but the profession itself is not diverse enough to understand what those underlying motivations are of individuals and communities that are outside of that practice. The second point here is science and engineering is a fantastic economic ladder, and so when we aren't creating opportunities for people who are diverse to enter the field and profession and to persist within that field and profession, there's a disservice in keeping the inequities that we have in place. And so it'd be something that'd be ideal to address within curriculum and instruction. So what is it? What's the scary word? It comes from an earlier approach that's called culturally responsive pedagogy, and it's something that was introduced by Gloria Ladson-Billings a few decades ago, and it's a notion that there's three parts here. That we have a need to have students across any discipline to be a master of their own subject and to be culturally competent. Culturally competent though, well, what does that mean? Culturally competent doesn't mean that we have to understand or respect or tolerate each other. It's more so to understand that as individuals, not necessarily across communities or identities, but as individuals, we all have different backgrounds, different motivations, and that is irrespective of whether we visually appear to be the same or not. It could be that you yourself simply grew up in one part of the country or the world and you may racially or religiously or in another means identify with someone else immediately. You visibly present and you identify, but you have very different and very unique backgrounds. Cultural competence is about recognizing that each of us have different upbringings, different motivations, and different reasons for wanting to do something. And in most of our cases, that's how we practice engineering. We want to, in our own little ways, make the world a better place. But how do we as individuals want to make that world a better place, and how do we as instructors then articulate and connect with students? In a room full of 30 students, you may have 31, I don't know how that happens sometimes, 31 or 32 different unique reasons or motivations for why a student is sitting in that classroom. So how as we, as instructors, how do we connect with that in our instruction? Well, we can do that in a number of different ways, and I'll go through that, but I do want to make note of just one more aspect, which is that culturally responsive pedagogy wasn't enough. And there's been this approach that's been emerging more so since the 90s of also having instructors create and facilitate a classroom environment in which the students not only become tolerant of each other, yeah, you know, sure, I'm going to acknowledge that you think different than I do, fantastic, let's go on with our lives, but let's actually dig a little bit deeper into that aspect and have students become socially aware of who they are and who others are, and perhaps investigate and explore what factors might be at play that might keep another person from being as successful as one's own. And it's a very broad understanding of just where someone fits into their political environment, their cultural environment, their social environment, and how it is that not everyone actually gets to enjoy those same environments. Everyone's uniquely different in their own upbringing, but everyone's also different in where they are in life. So can we do something about this? And there's actually a few different things that we can do. But before I get much further, I want to remind you that I'm not actually talking about topics that you have not thought about yourselves already. I hope some of you recognize what these words are up here. So for a lot of our civil engineering programs, we have the ABIT student learning outcomes, and we previously had A through K, now we have 1 through 7, but the gist of these learning outcomes remain the same. And what I want to point out to you is that these learning outcomes are encapsulated quite well by these 3 preceding topics. We want students to have academic subject mastery of engineering topics and principles. And we have a handful of learning outcomes that are focused on this. We want students to be culturally competent, to understand how others exist, how they act, how they are, and how they do. We have learning outcomes that are grounded in that area. When we ask students to be able to, for an example, function on a multidisciplinary team, that's not just multidisciplinary by training and subdiscipline. It's also, if you have a room full of civil engineers, and I think we have quite an overrepresentation here today, you all have different backgrounds. And so you have to be able to function on that team, and we ask our students to do that. Well, we can format that so that it's a bit broader, and they're having to function across different gender, different racial identity, different country of origin, different languages. That's multidisciplinary. So we're already talking about this. I want to go over to understanding professional and ethical responsibility and the broad education necessary to understand the impact of engineering solutions in a global, economic, environmental, and societal context. We already ask our students, hey, engineering is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to take into account all the contexts in which we apply engineering towards. That's critical consciousness right there. We've already been thinking about this in civil engineering, but we maybe just don't know how to approach it in a way that's conducive to having students who don't identify as engineers or maybe struggle to understand how engineering fits into their own lives. So we just have to kind of rethink this and see how we can maybe maximize what we're already trying to achieve. So, what isn't culturally relevant pedagogy? And I know I'm belaboring this point, but it's only because it's a new wording here. So what it's not is, it's not focused on culture. This isn't the notion of changing names on an engineering prompt and saying, as an example, instead of John and Mary, we'll have Juan and Maria. That is not what this is about. That doesn't create more inclusivity, and perhaps that can actually create more exclusionary activities because you're now sort of isolating things to trivialities like names or food or movies. So that's not quite what we're doing here. It's still more so about unique individuals and how they can potentially see themselves as engineers in the future. Nor is it an adoption of soft topics. We're not softening the curriculum. We are still maintaining engineering rigor. We are still focusing on the topics at hand for engineering design and analysis. It's not only for minorities, twofold. It's not only for minority faculty to try, and it's not only for minority students. Everyone benefits because everyone has their unique backgrounds, has their unique lived experiences, and we have to be able to elicit and draw that out from students and validate it in the classroom. So this isn't just for a subset of students or faculty, and unfortunately, it is not easy to deploy, and it is not easy to understand this pedagogical approach. In fact, it's been most successful in K-12 education, particularly in the math and science fields. There's been great results. However, it has not been greatly investigated or explored in college engineering curriculum, let alone anything much further than that. So all I can offer to you today are some insights about what it is that I've been trying to do in my own professional training and my own professional teaching, and maybe just anecdotal stories that we might be able to gather from the room if people have things to contribute. So, some things that we might be able to do. If we want to elicit students and their lived experiences into the classroom so that they can self-identify as, maybe I've got the right things that I need to be an engineer as I continue on with this program. Open-ended problem or project-based learning. This can work. Open-ended problem or project-based learning is giving students an opportunity or a prompt to be able to impose or impart their own lived experiences into an open-ended problem in which there is no singular right solution. But we can do a little bit better than this, because what often happens is we might give them a very open-ended technical problem to pursue, a problem that is overly constrained so that they are not able to actually impart their own lived experiences. So can your prompts, if you're already employing PBL learning, open-ended PBL learning, does the prompt encourage students to explore their own underlying motivations and passions for why they're taking that course, if it's an elective, why they're in the profession, if it's a major? Or is the prompt itself too narrowly focused? And as an example, I simply note here that you might ask a student in maybe an RC class or structural analysis class to go ahead and design a new building, or perhaps an extension of a hospital, or some aspect like this, and it happens to be located in a geographic location. You provided your student with a client, you've provided them with all the context, there's no creativity there. There's creativity in the design process. They might have some options to play around with on the technical aspect of it, but there's no opportunity for them to now impress upon their own motivations about why they're doing what they're doing. So instead of thinking about an open-ended problem as one where there's only a technical set of variety, is it possible for prompts to be rewritten where students get to perhaps choose the location or choose a client? And perhaps it's not quite a high-rise, it's perhaps a different structure. They'll undertake the same learning experience of the technical content, but now they're able to bring in variety in what they're choosing to do. Some students who have come in engineering who are altruistic in their own nature may want to do something and think about this in a study abroad type of manner. Some students might want to think about their own local community. Some students may want to build the tallest skyscraper that they can in a small Midwest town. It's all fine. They're all going to undertake the same learning process, but there's now some openness and variability in what it is that they can do, and it provides an opportunity for them to just explore their own passions and motivations. Case studies are fantastic because they offer us opportunities to present information where students have to combat against competing environmental, ethical questions that do touch on cultural and social aspects. But again, can we somehow narrow this down so that the students are able to bring in their own experiences into their own discussion, whether that's in the technical work or in-class discussion? And my example here is, instead of the Eisenhower interstate system in the US being discussed broadly and perhaps in a historical context, this is still pervasive. This is still engineering practice to this day. Can we instead allow the students to bring in their own lived experiences by talking about local road projects, either in their hometowns or in your campus town, and seeing how that affects them, or it affects their neighbors, or it affects their friends and family. And perhaps there's an opportunity then for them there's an opportunity for them to engage with community stakeholders or business groups and advocacy groups who have different perspectives on these improvement projects. So it's not something that's abstract, it's something more concrete where the students themselves can actually participate in understanding. Engineering design challenges. I'm actually trying to do this now in my own research. I teach statics and dynamics, which is a joined class. And here I have our students able to explore unexplored or unknown stakeholders and communities that may not be part of the prompt. If we have scenarios where we have a client approaching a consultancy made up of students and the students are now responding to that client's needs, are there opportunities for the students to explore different stakeholders who may not be a part of that client's portfolio of information? And what we can do here is encourage students to realize that there are others who are affected in a positive and negative way due to engineering work. As an example, there's going to be some change to the environment, whether the construction project, I'm thinking, is constructed or not constructed, or there will be an economic impact about who gets hired and who doesn't get hired for the construction work. So is there an opportunity for students to explore these values? And one thing that I'm trying now in my statics and dynamics class is, instead of asking students to design a thrill ride, a roller coaster in a dynamics portion of this class, I'm asking them to kind of think about this in a bigger sense. I'm asking them to think about whether an amusement park with a roller coaster that they're going to design anyway using dynamic principles is an appropriate solution for the community in which we all reside in. It's forcing the students to investigate who wants an amusement park here anyway. The client does. The client's going to make a lot of money. But is this for the local community? Is it for patrons within the state or within a driving region? And what are the trade-offs here? It becomes secondary, but it's still now teasing out from the students and understanding about how engineering impacts more than just the owner and the engineer and the architect when we have those in place. And this is the hardest part. As educators, we're always the gatekeeper. So we know that we have our own ways of presenting to the students. We become the role models for who they should be emulating once they become practicing engineers. But whenever we can, students are uncomfortable with themselves already, enough to begin with. So how can we, as instructors who design the curriculum, who design courses, how can we modify our prompts that we're already doing to be a bit more welcoming to their different uniques and to their different backgrounds and motivations, to bring that into the curriculum and to validate their own experiences? Because what we're trying to say is you can be an engineer and you may have the right tool set even though you may not feel like you have it. And I have one example from this. Back when I was in the civil engineering program, I had students who thought that they were woefully inequipped to be an engineer because they hadn't gained any internship experiences over the last few summers. But what they had gained was a lot of mechanical training and a lot of field experience working in ranching and heavy machinery in a very industrialized part of the city. It's not a glamorous internship, it's still useful, skilled labor. And being able to understand that and at least validate that and bring those experiences into the classroom is perhaps an avenue that will help us retain more students who come from diverse backgrounds. So those are the comments that I had prepared for you if anyone has any questions, but I'll go ahead and start getting the microphone over to Jenny.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to all of you. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family where my father said his life mission was to make the world a smaller place. Different actions that he did to help make that happen were hosting 5 different exchange students from the time I was about 10 until going off to college. And we also adopted a teenager from Ethiopia. Why be multilingual? Interestingly enough, at about the age of 16, my family was traveling in Quebec City. One day when my father was in the bank exchanging cash, we were just sitting outside on the steps of this building. A bus turned a corner, a very tight corner as you're experiencing here. That bus hit a light pole. The light pole fell down, it pinned my leg to the steps, and the light and the glass encasing hit my sister on the head. People were instantly helpful. Police came, whisked my sister, me, and my mother off to the hospital. While my mom was dealing with paperwork, insurance, etc., my sister and I went back with a nurse. The nurse spoke only French, and another nurse was brought in who also spoke only French. My leg was okay, I could walk on it, but my little sister had a head wound, and I was genuinely scared. Eventually, about 20-25 minutes later, a doctor came in and he was able to speak with us, and we got my sister taken care of. That moment helped me realize, wow, I am handicapped by only being able to speak English. I went on to study Spanish, and you'll see a lot of different stories about how that has shaped my life. Opportunities for business will be improved if you are more multicultural, and you will have an ability to work differently with graduate students. If you are more multicultural, you have an opportunity to hire the best and very best individuals to come work on your team. So in college, I was fortunate enough to apply and receive a Rotary Scholarship to study abroad. I chose the University of Costa Rica. Unfortunately, 3 years of high school Spanish and working as a nanny in Spain gave me enough to be conversational. And as an overachiever, I enrolled in Dynamics of Soils. After about 3 weeks in, I realized it was way over my head, simply because the verbal skills required to succeed in a soils class, especially Dynamics of Soils, was just beyond what I could do. So I quickly transferred into matrix analysis, and a matrix is a matrix in every language, and that was no problem. I'm proud to say after a year, I was able to handle whatever class they threw at me. Here, I do have a picture of the lab, but quite frankly, some of the extracurricular activities were, I thought, more exciting to show all of you. I've been fortunate to give a lot of different presentations. As a student, you will do your project defense, a thesis defense, and all sorts of group presentations. Educators, have as many presentations as you can in your class. It is a professional skill that your students will thank you for later. I've also had the opportunity and been invited to give presentations in Costa Rica, Cancun, Mexico, and I recently presented to 200 structural engineers in Mexico City. Now, I talked a lot about conceptual topics because as a US citizen, that is what we value. The engineers would have preferred to see more and more equations. So had I thrown in an equation or two in there, they might have been more technically wowed. However, it's just an experience I had, and I still stand behind talking about concepts and behavior. So, in general, when making presentations, as you move forward and as you practice with experience, your skills will absolutely improve. Should you rehearse? Initially, when you are starting out your career, absolutely rehearse. Know your time. Anytime you present in another language, you should rehearse. If possible, rehearse in front of native speakers so that if there are local terms, you're able to use those and really fit in with the culture as much as possible. Watch your speed of presentation. In another language, you will speak more slowly. You will want to be more exact, and you really need to be careful on your timing issues. Now, Latin America is not quite as concerned about timing, but in the US or other cultures, time is essential. You have to know your audience. I've talked about presenting equations or not. Throw a couple in there. Something that I've always done, I've found a trusted colleague. After presentations, I ask someone that I respect and someone that I know, Do you have any suggestions for improvement? It's always a good idea. You take the comments, you filter, and then you decide if you want to make changes or you're okay with how it went. If you're speaking in English to native speakers, to Spanish speakers, or this could apply to most of the Romance languages, use cognates, use words that sound similar. Your audience will say, wow, I'm really understanding English better than I thought I could. Another philosophy is to take pictures and get business cards. How many of you here are good with faces? Most people are better with faces than names. I happen to be a little bit better with names than faces. Many of my young students all look alike to me. However, these are some methods to help you remember who you've met, who you haven't. And another phenomenon, if you're not super familiar with a culture or what somebody who looks different than you is like, you will find that they look similar. I'm now able to look at an African person and say, oh, if they're from Ethiopia, I know, because they have high cheekbones. But it just takes time to develop these skills, and it's a great skill to have, but don't be frustrated if you don't have them for quite some time. At the University of Wyoming, we've developed an initiative. One of our strategic goals is to send more students abroad. I was fortunate enough to receive a Partners in the Americas grant. It is a mission to send 100,000 students back and forth to Latin America. So we developed a class, a colleague and I, she's an art historian, and we set it up to be engineering and culture of Latin America. We kept it global, Latin America, so that if we decide to go to Peru, visit Machu Picchu, or other places, then we could design a subset and cater a specific class to that area. Here, we went to an area of Mayan ruins. We went to the Yucatecan Peninsula, Merida. That is, if you go to Cancun, 3 hours west, about 20 minutes from the top of the peninsula. And we spent a week touring Mayan ruins. Each student had to do free body diagrams. We started simple, gravity loads, then we included lateral loads, and we talked even a little bit about seismic and how to handle the free body diagrams of these pyramids. The fun thing was we had chemical engineers, one electrical engineer. We had a wide range of students. We also visited their local university. We got a tour of all their labs, and the students realized, wow, education here is pretty similar to what we have in the US. If you're going to teach a travel class, figure out what resources are available. Ask your dean for scholarships. Next, will it fall under your typical teaching load? A wise department head is going to say no, simply because if everybody in the department asked to do a teaching class to another country, would you be able to cover your regular classes? However, some universities may have sufficient capacity that such a class could fall under your teaching load. Logistics. Get help from on-the-site people. If you don't have that, then you can use a travel agency and have them put together a package. That cost is generally going to be a little bit more expensive, but you don't want to be doing all the logistics. It is a lot of on-the-ground work. When you're recruiting, what we did, we made presentations, we showed a lot of wow factors. Truly, Chichen Itza is not one of my favorite places. There's a lot of commercialism, there's a lot of, it's just really, really busy. However, it was a good thing to do because a couple students wanted to come just to see Chichen Itza. However, after that, all the students said Uxmal, which is another area, much more calm, quiet. They all preferred the ruins that were less commercial. Absolutely require a writing sample and link it to whatever scholarship or assistance you may have. This can help you identify students who are very weak writers. In our class, writing was about 50% of it. And it can help you identify some high maintenance students who just might not travel well or might not be good ambassadors. If you're developing a class, go through the hoops of your university to get it to count as a humanities or a writing class. Engineers are frequently trying to optimize their class and their degree to do it in as few classes as possible. You will even run up against some advisors or faculty members saying, why would you do this? I don't need to explain to this group why multicultural experience is important, but bear in mind that you may not have support of the entire college. So, supervising good ambassadors abroad. First of all, I'd like to mention that these skills could easily transfer to anybody taking Engineers Without Borders, overseas, or any other groups. Set the stage. Tell them what to expect when they go to the country. Clarify your expectations. If people were drinking irresponsibly any drugs, they were immediately put on a plane and sent home. That's what the syllabus said. It never happened. But you want to be prepared for this type of situation. Be an example. You set the tone by what you're doing. And meals. Encourage the students to eat as much as eat everything, try items. We had no cell phones at the table. That's just my rule at home, and that was my rule traveling with the students. And encourage them to get out and enjoy things as much as possible. Another meal idea is to send the students out for dinner on their own to help them get through ordering and to just help them have experiences where they don't continually come to you for the answer. Teaching across cultures. As part of this grant, I was also able to host a group of 6 students, a dean, and a colleague from UWADI, the Autonomous University of the Yucatan. And 6 students came. We built a beam. Well, we had the blocks all set up, and then the students grouted and tested it during their last day. Every morning we had about 3 hours of class on masonry. Now, I'd like to talk about gender here. When you're in the lab, I used to simply ask the guys to do the heavy lifting. Now, during this one, I noticed that the female students were in the back chatting, discussing. So I made sure that we had scoops. I don't think you can ask a very tiny person to lift a 5-gallon bucket of sand into a mixer. But I brought them scoops, we made sure that they could do it, and I got them involved. In general, women will sit back. Get them involved. Also be sensitive. Some of the students from Mexico, one of the guys couldn't lift the 5-gallon bucket. And just make sure that smaller students do get involved and you're encouraging people at every step of the way. Graduate student recruiting. I keep in touch with my grad school contacts. It's a longer relationship as time goes by. However, I've had really, really good luck with recruiting students from Middle Eastern Technical. If you can get a pipeline where you know you're always going to get good students or an honest answer from a former colleague, do it. Do it. Work to get your students from places. Respond to inquiries about working with you. For example, whenever I get an email, I encourage them to formally apply, simply because I can't consider a student for an internal TA unless they are in our system. When I have funding, I conduct Skype interviews, I ask for a sample of their writing, and then I ask them to do an essay for me. For example, I say, why are you an independent thinker, yet still a team player? I find something that they need to write simply to get a feel for who they are. I always ask what they're reading in my Skype interview, simply because the more somebody reads, the better off they are and the better writer they will be. Then I check references really carefully. Every 6 months, I write back to the advisor telling him, hey, this is what's happening, this is what I'm doing. If there is a challenge, I work with the former advisor and we help to address it. Mentoring. One of the fun things about my job is having international students and working with them. I learn as much as I can about them. At Wyoming, we have dinners for different areas. Like we'll have Nepali night, we'll have China night, and I go to all of those dinners that I'm invited to. I bring my family and I get to know my students in a more personal way. I've also found that some of the students I've hired, they actually didn't do the lab work. They had a technician in their country to do it. And I now have learned ask, and if they need help for safety issues or working with tools, get them the help. There's not always a Home Depot and a culture of working on your house to help. And some students feel very uncomfortable in the lab until we've given them the encouragement and training that they need. In the event of performance issues, talk to the student, then put it in writing. It's just the best way to do it. Finally, this reminded me of some of the awesome benefits of being a professor. We get to pick what we study. We get to help define our day. We will make lifelong friendships and encourage international travel. Really, the students help keep me young. They are fun. Ways to become more international. Consider if you want to see another 2-3 museums on a trip, or if you're invited to somebody's home in another country, do it. That is a special thing. Study another language, host an exchange student. However, if you're going to host an exchange student, go with a program that doesn't pay you for doing it. If you're getting paid for hosting a student, there could be more entitlement issues or unwritten expectations. And finally, while you're here at ACI and you still have a few days, talk about sabbatical opportunities with colleagues here from other countries. My family is currently in Mexico. My son is in a bilingual school to learn Spanish, or as much as he can, at the age of 3. Things like that are huge. And the younger your kids are, trust me, the easier it will be for them to learn another language. This is what I've got. Thank you.
That's all we've got, so let's give the speakers a hand.